I'm curious. Um, are your parents still around?
They are, both of them, yes.
Thank God, because they lived through it. What have they ever spoken with you about their experience?
It's funny you should ask that because people around, like my parents have never really said anything about the period, right? And my family, they're, they come from like the what you'd call the projects, right? They're very like humble people, hardworking. They weren't really, especially back then, they weren't really connected to what was going on in society and politics because again, back then, no freedom of the press, not a lot of people are
Right,
paying attention. So my
right.
the idea that I have about my parents specifically is they were pretty alienated from what was going on. I in fact asked my grandfather, who was still around, what he knew about what were the big events in his lifetime, right? And he was telling me that he heard something about the war because he heard it on the radio, but it was in Europe, so they didn't care about it. And he's talking about World War II. That's how disconnected. They didn't know who fought it. They didn't know what it was about. It's just there was some big war in Europe. And as I was
Wow.
thinking my crops type of thing, like I heard about it. So the impression I have from my parents specifically is that they just didn't know that much about what was going on. And I can't really blame them because a lot of people did, yes.
Yeah. Wow. I, I'm truly stunned by that because, here in the States where there used to be freedom of the press, I think maybe there still is. Sorry about that by editorial comment. But, but, but at least there's some knowledge and awareness of what's going on. I mean, that plays right into a dictatorship, doesn't it?
Oh,
That
absolutely, 100%. In fact, the people who speak positively about the dictatorship, you can see them parroting the propaganda that they were fed, like 100%. Like they bought it entirely with no question, right? So one thing that you hear a lot about, it's like a jargon from people who, the apologists, the dictatorship apologists. They say things like, "Oh, the only people getting in trouble with the secret police were the troublemakers." But by troublemakers, they mean university students who happen to be associated with, say, socialist movements or democratic leaning movements. They were branded insiders. They were the word that they used back then was subversives. So if you're branded as subversives, there's this air of like McCarthyism. It was like being called the communist in the McCarthy age. But maybe you're just again a political science major who has some leftist leanings, and that's enough to brand you an enemy of the state. And back then, between 64 and 84, that's all it took for you to disappear. And to this day, there's a lot of families that still don't know what happened to their children because they were taken in the middle of the night. They're taken from the school, right? But then, like I've heard from relatives of mine, thankfully not my father and mother, because I'd be pretty embarrassed to admit that. But I've heard from other relatives, the only people getting trouble back then were the troublemakers. These troublemakers. And it seems like they don't really they bought the lie that if you had left leaning let's say if you're a left leaning person, right, if you're involved with some kind of like student movement or anything like that, you're a terrorist. You're out robbing banks to fund the revolution. And also they say like we had to take power. Even the ones who say the military dictatorship was maybe overkill, but we had to do that because the communists were ready to take over, and if we hadn't done it, they would have done it. But really, there were no big communist threat in the way they think was viable. Like we're the fifth largest country in the world. I don't think a handful of students who read Karl Marx will be able to take over the whole country. Like it doesn't seem viable to me. And to most historians who seriously look into the matter, it seems like it's just propaganda. The government would occasionally arrest some guy who like had these plans to like rob banks, or indeed did, because that did happen. These student groups, some of them were more militarized and they had weapons. There was the kidnapping of a U.S. ambassador, I think in the 70s or something like, or a consul, something like that. I forget exactly, but it was some representative of the United States government that was kidnapped back then. So some violence did occur, but it was small pockets. It was very isolated to justify an entire 20 years of military rule, of no freedom of the press, of no elections, because some students had these like lofty dreams of armed revolution. It seems to me like it's more propaganda than an actual communist threat that was about to take over. That's me. Maybe that's me editorializing, Dr. Joe.
Sounds like a bunch of cultural Marxism to me.
well,
What
No
happened in
way.
1984?
In 1984, there was a depends on who you ask. So what we learned in school is that there was a growing sentiment that that things weren't working anymore. Inflation was kicking into overdrive. The military wasn't really that suited to run a country. So the people were coming to the streets to protest for elections. A movement called Diretas Já, which basically it loosely translates to elections now. So eventually the military was like, all right, you guys can have it, and just we got democracy again, right? But again, it depends on who you ask, right? Some people say that those armed, let's say militias, student militias that were, in their small little ways trying to fight back. Eventually, the government thought that, the government thought that it wasn't worth the trouble to engage with them. Like, it varies who you ask. But my view is that the military just the economy was going to explode. It was what they were doing. They were doing a lot of sleight of hand, economic sleight of hand, to make it seem like there was economic boom. But they knew that the bottom line wasn't going to add up the way they wanted, and they didn't want to hold the bag, is what I think. So that's why they willingly said, you know what, it's fine, you guys can have it back. And then immediately after, surprise, surprise, the highest inflation we ever had, and a lot of corruption was uncovered after that. So
And you were living there until you were about how old in
I
Brazil?
was 19 when I moved to Canada in 2003.
So what was that change like from Brazil to Canada?
It was incredible. It was in a lot of ways like going to another world. I was familiar with North American culture. I didn't speak very good English back then, but I could understand it almost fluently, and enough to make friends and stuff like that. But everything was very different, from the climate to certain societal customs, right? Certain things that to me just seem flat out rude, but it's just the way things are done here, and vice versa. I'm sure that there's a lot of things, especially that we Brazilians do, that might be seen as rude to Canadians. It's just the culture shock, right? It took a while to get over that, but I started going to high school and I started making friends and dating and all these things. So little by little, the information I got from firsthand, knowledge of being immersed in the culture, filled in the gaps from what I had from like watching movies and TV shows and things like that. Because I had some understanding I had some expectations, like from watching movies and pop culture that we import from the US, right? Like all the things that you guys, like the movies that you grew up watching, are in a lot of ways are the same things that we grew up watching, right? TV,
Mhm.
not so much with syndication. There's a lot of things that were bigger in the States that never crossed over. But like a lot of like sitcoms and movies, we get all of those things. So I knew a lot about what to expect, but it was still learning the language, right? Took a lot, and certain things that you're just so used to doing that they come so naturally because they're your culture, and you shouldn't do those kinds of things.
And you moved up for school, for college, or why the
No,
move at all?
my dad got a job here, right? My dad
Ah,
works in IT, and he got a job here at the company that he used to work with. That company no longer exists, but he's a good professional, so he was able to continue his career just with a different company. And the whole family came, right? It was because of my dad, and my mom and my two siblings came. My parents got divorced sometime after, and my family, half of my family, relocated to the United States, and I stayed behind with my dad. But yeah,
and
and now
who's
everybody
still
lives here in Calgary.
and who's still in Brazil then of the
The rest of the
family?
family, so everybody else, like grandparents, cousins, uncles, like everybody else, my friends from like university. So I'm very blessed in a way, because most immigrants don't have like their immediate family all living in the city where they live. Although to me, the irony is that I've kind of had enough with the Canadian life, and I'm thinking, as I become financially independent because of YouTube, because of my work here on the internet, I realize I could live anywhere I wanted. And I've had enough of the Canadian winters, especially here in Calgary and the Rockies. It's especially tough. And I'm like starting out to map out this project of living a nomadic lifestyle. I can work if I have a laptop, an internet connection, and a camera. I can make a living anywhere in the world. So why live where it's like it snows for 4 months out of the year?
Wow. That's so true. And I think a lot of people may start realizing that they can be more mobile and start
Absolutely.
working remotely.
Live
I think
where
that's one of
you
the
want to be, not where you need to be, right?
What was that,
that's
Mark?
one of
Live, we've been saying this since the beginning of the pandemic in our world, is live where you want to be, not where you need to be, right?
Mm,
Because everything can be done remotely now, right? You're not being
yeah.
asked to go in and punch a clock in the office,
it's
you know,
fast.
especially for Izzy though. I mean, all you have to do is set up a studio and keep moving it around.
Exactly. I've been thinking about that like for the last like 3, 4 months when this, the seeds of this idea, like when I look around, I have a pretty decent setup. It's messy back here, but that's not what my viewers see. The camera's facing the other way. They see, you're not seeing like the nice part of the studio. You're seeing the mess. You're seeing how the sausage gets made here.
It's
But
great.
all the things, it's like I have a lot of nice things and like the setting is cool and everything. But really, it all boils down to like my computer, my phone, and a camera. So if I
Yeah.
have those, like all of this stuff is like it's just literally set dressing, like the action figures and the fancy computer and all those things. I don't need that to connect with people, to create the content that I create, right? So I've been thinking about that every single day for the past few months.
Where are
And
you looking?
I'm sorry.
Where are you looking?
So I'm looking all over like Latin America, basically. Brazil, obviously, because I speak the language and I understand the culture and I have family, is the obvious place to go. But because of everything that's going on politically and because of how outspoken a critic of the president I am, though that might sound outrageous, this president has already sicked the judicial arm of the government on YouTubers who speak about him. This has happened to
Uh,
people I know personally. So it's like when I decide to go down there, it's going to be one of those things where I'm not going to be so open about where I am exactly, kind of thing,
yeah.
because
Mhm.
you can never be too careful, especially when there's precedent. When somebody has made a YouTube video, a guy I know personally, and the president said, "Yeah, let's try to see what this guy's about. Like, see if something sticks. Throw something at him and see if it sticks." Thankfully, that wasn't the case. But the fact that the president is motivated enough to persecute vloggers is something that I have to keep in mind if I'm thinking of relocating. Central America is I've visited there before, and obviously as a tourist, right? But the currency exchange is in my favor, obviously, and I love the weather. As a Canadian citizen, I can stay pretty much wherever I want for I think it's 6 months at a time, depending on the country. And then in the summer I can come back here, stay with my family, and then keep traveling. Just I've had enough of being under snow is the point, really.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah.
There's so much going on in Brazil right now that we hear. I mean, in the news, there's COVID, there's a lot of cocaine and other drug trafficking, and I mean, you have an amazing platform, Izzy. How do you want to use this platform?
I've gotten way more political recently, in these last few, because like I said, my content started with video games, nerd stuff, comic books, sci-fi, right? Like this movie that I watch, you guys should watch it. It's great, or it's crap. And then over time, it slowly got more political as I started to notice, as Dr. Joe pointed out, I have an audience, I have a platform, and as a comic book reader, the phrase "with great power comes great responsibility" is something that I
Yes.
have to keep in mind. So I started talking about certain issues that interest me, that I find important, especially with the radicalization that we're seeing growing on the internet, right? Like I saw what happened in the United States in the Trump era, and I'm seeing this now in real time happening with Bolsonaro. And because I reach a lot of people, there's a lot of things that, though I always thought like I'm not really qualified to talk about this, but I know enough and I follow enough about the news and about this subject matter that I can reach out to some people and say, hey, pay attention to this. This is what this means. This is what this could mean in the future. We got to keep an eye out on this. And so yeah, I became a unwitting kind of like an older brother, I feel like, to a lot of my audience, like people who are younger, clearly younger than me. I'm 36, and a lot of my audience isn't like in the 20 to 30 age. And obviously, I understand a little more about like economics and politics in the world than your average 20-year-old, right? Obviously, there's some brilliant people out there, but the guy who's just like fresh out of high school and never worked in his life and he lives at home, his world is perhaps really small and he hasn't paid attention to a lot of what's going on around him, right? So I see myself as like, hey, I can talk about the video games and the movies and all these things, But when these things happen, like these big things happen, I feel like I need to say something about this. Because the other people, the people who are trying to radicalize them to their side, they're going to pick up my slack for sure. Right. So when I see things like, for instance, when the George Floyd thing was a big turning point in my channel, I think, because it was very North American, but it was being washed over by the entire world. And people in Brazil, they couldn't really fully understand what was going on because, you know, they don't speak English, they don't understand the culture. Though we have our own problem with people of color and suffering oppression by the police, right? It's not like there's a lot that's a little different. They don't fully understand it. They try to apply what they know about Brazilian culture to that scene, and I have to explain, no, you know, it was serious. It was a big problem because of this, and this. And the worst part to me was realizing that some of the white supremacist talking points that are common on the North American side of the internet were trickling down to the Brazilian side of the internet, right? Like things like, one thing that I always heard people say in these places, like the 1350 statistic that I think you might be familiar with, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So
It's so ridiculous. It's astounding that every other stat is irrelevant and it's fake and it's a hoax. But did you know that 13% of the population?
yeah, so it's something for those who might not know, right? Like this refers to a statistic by the FBI that the African American community, though a minority of the population, commits a good chunk of the crimes. And people don't want to understand why that's happening. They just jump to the conclusion immediately that that must mean that Black people are genetically predisposed to committing crimes. Like, no, that's not why. There's a sociological explanation as to why, if you enslave people for hundreds of years and then you give them freedom, but then you enact a bunch of laws that still keep them down, naturally what's going to happen years after that is that these people, this community, is going to be more crime is going to be more common, more prevalent in a community if that's what you do to them. That's why. But they are not interested in the explanation, the historical explanation. They're just interested in, hey, this statistic, quote unquote, proves that the police isn't being unnecessarily tough on them. It's just they're naturally more violent for some reason. So that's necessary. When I saw Brazilians saying that, it worried me because that's something I always saw as, yeah, Americans will say that, like, you know, there's some white supremacists in the States, they say stuff like that, but Brazilians don't say that stuff, right? And when I saw them saying that, I'm like, all right, I need to jump in and try to explain before this idea, this prejudice takes hold, right? And perhaps not coincidentally, it was Bolsonaro's crowd that was working hard to push that narrative. And that's when I realized that all I stand for is going to be against this government. So I'm going to have to say something. I can't let people watch my stuff and think, I wonder if Izzy supports this guy, you know?
Now, Izzy, did you have a, oh shit, is this what it's been like with the Dick Show community? I'm not, like, Dick Masterson is no dummy, but a lot of the fan base and the like extended universe, it feels like there was an about face.
I
And
was
you,
wondering if you're gonna bring that up. Dick Masterson is a comedian, right? And I find him hilarious, and I've met him personally, and he's a great guy. I've actually sought his advice by email. Like when things happen in my life, I always looked up to him to like this like older brother that I didn't have, because
yeah,
though I disagree with a lot of what he believes in, some of his advice is like, hey, you know, there's some truth to that, and I like his sense of humor, right? But as you've noticed, there was a point when like Dick was, you know, supporting Trump, and we all thought it was kind of like a joke, it's a bit, but then he started to like argue more and more in favor of Trump, and I'm like, and noticing the community as well, I'm like, okay, I don't really like, I still like his sense of humor. I don't watch the pod, like I don't listen to the podcast anymore because I just don't listen to podcasts in general these days. Like my habits have, I used to listen to podcasts a bunch when I commuted and when I was, you know, traveled and stuff like that. At home, it's not really like I'd prefer to listen to music. Anyway, I noticed that like the community started shifting towards that side, and that's when I kind of disengaged myself from, you know, not because of his sense of humor change or anything like that. I don't think he's an asshole or anything like that, but I don't identify so much with the side of the internet that he seems to talk to these days, let's say.
yeah, because I was like, he's a good guy, and people he mostly associates with are good people. He'll go on like the Ralph retort with like Richard Spencer and stuff, but you can't hold him
Yeah.
responsible for that.
That's the kind of thing that I look at. I'm like, yeah, see, that's not something I would have.
I mean,
would have
I
done.
wouldn't get so excited about like having him on, but for those who don't know, Richard Spencer is a white nationalist. He tries to make a difference, say it's different from a white supremacist, but it's essentially the same.
He throws Hitler salutes. Like, that's all you need to know about the guy.
Yeah, that's all you need to know. And
right.
For the
I think. Sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
No, but like, yeah, for the sake of being a provocateur, and then you can just play it off as it's just a joke.
Yeah, you see, the problem with that is that white supremacists, right? Like, there's a concept called crypto-fascism, where people will joke, quote unquote, about certain ideas, outrageous ideas, extremist, supremacist ideas, and then when called out on it, they have that plausible deniability of saying, no, it's all a joke. Right? It's very common right now. I'm sure you're familiar with the whole OK sign controversy.
Yep.
Dr. Joe, do you know what I'm talking about?
No, tell us about that. Go ahead.
So the OK sign, right? Like doing this, right? This has existed since like the 1700s, right? And it always meant, okay, everything's good, right? But in around 2017, 4chan, the image board, decided to put on this prank on the media, and they said, okay, guys, we're gonna all start saying that this means white, so like the W sign formed by my 3 fingers here, and this is a P for power. This means white power. From now on, we're going to say this. They're going to fall for it. It's going to be hilarious. The problem is the white supremacists thought, hey, this is a good idea. We can use this as a secret handshake, and if anybody calls us out on it, it's all a joke, you dummy. It's a 4chan thing, you idiot. But coincidentally, it's all the neo-Nazis that are doing this. Always not because, hey, this is great, but to show an allegiance to a certain set of ideals, right? So yeah, I forget. So my point is, like, crypto fashion, like throwing up these symbols and trying to like play it off as, no, it's all a joke, it's all a goof. In fact, the Bolsonaro's one of the people in his cabinet was recently fired because during a Senate hearing, he's sitting behind the president of the Senate, and he threw up a little quote unquote OK sign. But the problem is, on his header on Twitter, the phrase "don't go gentle into good." I'm misquoting it. It's the Dylan Thomas. Dylan Thomas, I think his name. Yes. That sentence has been co-opted by white nationalists, and in fact, Brenton Tarrant, the guy who shot up the mosque in New Zealand, I think, he opens his manifesto with that sentence. So when in court, he also flashed the OK / white supremacy. So it's too many coincidences, like if you're flashing the sign of the same guy who wrote a manifesto, and then on your header on Twitter, the phrase you use is that same manifesto. And by the way, he once tweeted the motto of an European neo-Nazi organization, like an actual terrorist group, right? So all of these coincidences become a little hard to take. Like the plausible deniability, there's a diminishing returns on that,
Dylan Thomas, just look it up.
I know which sign I'm not going to use.
Yeah, right. That's right.
I didn't know.
Do not go gentle into that good night. Old age should burn and rave at close of day. Rage, rage, rage against the dying of the light. We
must secure a future for.
Yeah. They have these little things, these little like secret handshakes. Really, is what it is. And it gives them the plausible deniability to say, no, that's just a joke. You're being ridiculous. That's a 4chan thing. That's just a quote from a poet. That's just, that's just 14 words. Like they do that. And it's not as slick as they think it is, but it works with some people, surprisingly. Like, you'll tell people, you explain why this is. In fact, the moment we're done here, I have to cover the story about the guy in the cabinet that flashed the OK sign in the Senate hearing and was fired for it. And I have to explain all these things, like everything I just said here. I'm quoting from the script that I just wrote, right? To explain, like, this is why they use these tactics. Because to the untrained eye, right, to the observer who is not in the know in these things, it's just a poem, it's just a sign, it's just whatever. But there's a crowd that they're signaling clearly. When you see who these people interact with on social media, when you see who responds to them, when you see the language they use, it's very clear that it's like a little corner of the internet that you don't really want to get mixed up with.
And I think
so. Go on, Tom.
and the words that find their way into more common language, I think, are so like I say, like I don't want to sound like I'm like speech police, but the word based, I think, has become so.
I know it's coded. It's politically coded now.
So, Dr. Joe and Mark, based is just like a one-word reply to anything. Anytime someone does something terrible or says
But
something
but they
awful,
approve of. But they approve of.
yeah, and so they'll just say based. Like based is like ballsy, or like you're standing up for yourself. And it was pretty innocuous to start with. This is like 15 years old, the term.
Yeah.
And now people might even say it sarcastically, but then they're like, wait, is this cool? I can't be an SJW, social justice warrior, and say this is bad, or I'll be called a cuck.
So I'm a psychiatrist, so my anxiety just went up.
Yeah.
I mean, it's really interesting listening to this and wondering, wow, there's this secret language out there that people are using to communicate with each other. And if it's secret, secrets aren't secrets because of what we've done. Secrets are secrets because we worry, how will someone judge me if they know my secret? I mean, that's why we keep secrets. We're worried that we will be judged. It's universal. And so the fact that we have an entire group that is secretly communicating with each other has meaning. What do you think they're afraid of? Why not just be right out open? You know what? This is my point of view. I'm prejudiced. I don't like certain things. And let's talk about it. Why can't we talk about these things?
Some people do. Some people will be more blatant about this, but
Okay.
typically because that takes admitting that, like in this case with like racial prejudice and everything. If you go from like quoting like the 1350 statistic to fully just embracing the idea that you find yourself superior to a black person, for instance, right?
Yeah.
By the time you get there, you must realize that that's socially deplorable. Like nobody's going to accept this. Nobody in good conscience. The only company you'll keep if you're saying these things outright are Nazis, right? And even though you might be so close to them, you might not want to fully admit that you are one, and maybe that's the disconnect. That's the cognitive dissonance, that you agree with them so much, but you know deep down that it's wrong what they're doing with the things they say, but you still agree with them, but you just don't want to be called that, right?
So you
And
inch closer and closer. I'm not a racist. I'm a race realist.
yes,
Like
the
we talked,
euphemisms.
I mentioned the bell curve last night, which is like this bunk bullshit study about race and IQ that everyone was so relieved to learn about, because it's like, oh, I was right all along. Right about what?
Yeah, that's it. Hey, it's right about what exactly? What do you mean? Yeah, that's
Mm.
true. That's exactly the reaction they have when they hear things like it's always like they misinterpret the statistics, or they're not looking into the sociological reasons as to why things became the way they are. And they come to the conclusion that, just like, for instance, if there's more crime in a black community than a white community, that means that black people are just naturally predisposed to that, which isn't the conclusion you should be drawing from this. What you should be drawing from this difference is the difference in outcome is that something happened a long time ago, but not really that long ago, because it wasn't that many generations ago. It wasn't long enough to completely erase the social results of these, of slavery, of racism, the Jim Crow laws, whatever, all these things, the sum of all these things. That's why these communities suffer more with the lack of access to education, and they don't make as much money. They don't have the same access to, these things, right?
And you just play and
So
get arrested more often.
they just plain get arrested more often, right? Or the police feel, because they hear the statistic, they jump to the conclusion that the black community is just inherently more violent, so we have to come down on them harder, which isn't true, right? But to some people who already thought these things, they hear a whiff of like, hey, there's some scientific backing to this. That's all I need to know, right? And that's why these ideas take hold.
Like alpha beta.
But
Yeah.
the association that comes to mind is Nazi Germany and the insidious progression of indifference. That there was just a slow sort of hypnosis, if you will, of an entire community to be indifferent to this particular group. But what we're really talking about here, I think, is the bright side. I know this is going to sound like a real weird sort of reframe, but here's the reframe. In order for us to really hurt somebody else, we have to dehumanize them. They have to become less than. They have to become part of an outgroup for us to then dehumanize them. What
Not
does
even
that
just
mean?
outgroup, I'd say a subgroup. Like it's not so much that they're out, it's like they're explicitly below us. That's how they feel.
Absolutely. But what does that really say about who we are as human beings? What it says, what do you think? What does it say? That the only way that we can feel comfortable at all about doing this to somebody else is to make them less than, and then it's okay. I think what that means is that we have a capacity and a need to value each other. And the only way we can really hurt somebody else is to see them as less valuable. And then it's okay. It's a reframe of who we are as human beings. Because one of the things that we talk about a lot on the Dr. Joe show is that we all want the same thing. We just want to feel valued by someone. I mean, that's what we want. Think about every person you've ever met in your life, Izzy. The common thread is they just want to feel valued by somebody else. That's what we want. And we can justify doing all these horrible things to other people if we don't see them as valuable. If we see them as valuable, we can't do it. We just can't do it, because that's part of who we really are as human beings. We identify with it. We resonate with it. We want the same thing. And what's cool is at every and any moment in time, you can remind someone of their value. And whenever you remind someone of their value, you increase your own value. But we have a challenge. And the challenge is a lot of people are so angry. A lot of people are so insecure, afraid that somebody's going to take something from them, that they want to do it first.
I agree with that 100%. Like going back to what Thomas said about the Dick show, right? Dick's a comedian. He's a contrarian. He's somebody who is usually on, especially for being a comedian, he's policed, let's say, by, as Thomas pointed out, the SJWs, the social justice warriors. These are people online who are, let's say, socially minded, and they'll say things like, don't say that racist thing, don't say that transphobic thing. They are telling people, hey, don't say that. That hurts somebody's feelings and everything like that. Understandably, somebody who makes a living telling jokes is not going to look too kindly on people telling him, hey, don't joke about that. That's why the sentiment that we have to resist people who are telling, hey, let's try to respect one another. Like I myself, I've always been pretty irreverent in my sense of humor, right? And I had a phase in my life where whenever I heard somebody that was, whatever they said basically boiled down to, hey, let's be more respectful. You shouldn't say that thing. You shouldn't act in this way. You shouldn't tell that joke. I reacted against that quite literally. Like I was a reactionary in the sense that I didn't even want to hear that. Like I don't want to hear it. Like I'm just joking. I'm not hurting anybody. It's just words. It has no effect other than maybe making somebody laugh. You are overreacting. This threat, you're saying, what? They're going to be Nazis now because I'm telling these irreverent jokes? Like, oh, you're just like, you're an idiot. And then the more I looked around, like, hey, that guy just flashed a fucking high limit. Like, what the hell is it? What's this about 14 words I'm here? How come these people are all gravitating towards that same sense of humor that I was defending? That like, hey, nothing about the sense of humor is dangerous to society at all. It's just a joke. Yes, it's just a joke to somebody like me or Thomas. But some of the people in the outskirts of pleasant society, let's say, they see that and they're like, he's also fighting against treating people nicely. He's one of my, like he's like
It's
that resonates with me.
it's a
That's why I feel,
validation. It's a
It's a
validation.
validation, I think, and it's a minority of people. I want to make this clear. It's not. We're not surrounded by white supremacists and neo Nazis. It's not quite as scary, I think. Right? Somebody like Dick Mass, like he's not a neo Nazi. Not. I wouldn't call the guy a white supremacist. Nothing like. I met the guy personally. He's not like that. But that sense of like I should maintain my right to offend you because it's my right to offend you, and I agree to that to some extent. It's going to inevitably attract a crowd that is not as well-meaning as you are, perhaps, right? I noticed that with my own crowd. When I was a little, let's say, to use a cliche phrase, a little more toxic like that, I noticed that the company I was keeping, they're like, hey, you're a little too weird. Like I was just telling a joke. Like you seem to like actually want to hurt people. And that's the difference, right? And that's why some like I can appreciate like I like the humor that I listen to, the comedians I follow, the people that I appreciate. My more left-leaning friends would be appalled that I still patronize these comedians, that I still listen to their stuff, that I like who they are as people. And what I tell them is that because I can tell the difference of somebody who just wants to be able to tell their jokes and be left in peace, and the actual evil people. And one tends to like this crowd tends to attract the other, but I still see them as different, and it's why I'm still able to enjoy certain types of like one of my favorite comedians, Anthony Jeselnik. Like this is not a progressive guy at all, I don't think, based on the jokes he tells, right? And as a progressive guy, I still enjoy. Like I put on his Netflix specials, and I'm laughing my ass off, and I'm thinking about like the social commentary that this joke. I wouldn't repeat this in public, but it says something about society, and it makes me think, right? But I understand why I understand why there's some trepidation that this kind of content serves as a lightning rod to these people that are not so well-meaning, let's say. Not sure if my position is clear, but that's a question I get all the time. Hey, if you're a progressive guy, why do you still enjoy this guy's content? Why are you still friends with this guy? Because he said that problematic thing a while back. I'm like, yeah, because I have a certain threshold, and this guy, to me at least, hasn't crossed the hey, this is a white nationalist threshold, if that makes any sense.
Right, but if we keep sort of limiting our friends or the things that we're listening to, how are we meant to understand anything? And
We
how
can't, and we can't reach them either.
right.
If you just log, like there's a host, a TV show host in Brazil, widely popular guy. He comes from like the stand-up crowd and then became the number one like late night. He's like a Stephen Colbert in a way. Like his show is like the one late night show everybody watches. He happens to enjoy my work. We follow each other. We talk to each other all the time. I did a video covering some recent controversy that he got involved with, and I explained what he did. I explained why that can be seen as offensive. I explained what's the social damage, if you will, that could cause. I explain why he thinks that it's not that serious. And I passed the question in the end to the viewer, right? And then I had a lot of people saying, you follow him? I'm so disappointed in you. Like, I can't believe, like, I thought you're a progressive guy. You talk to this guy? Like, that's so disappointing. I saw you follow him. And I said, I've talked to this guy, I've met him in a way that maybe you didn't. And he doesn't seem like a bad guy to me. Like, he might tell the, bad joke, the problematic joke, if you want to use that word. But I feel like if I were to tell him, hey, I think that people are offended because of this and this, maybe you didn't realize about this. What do you think about this? Maybe he might come to a different understanding about this. In fact, I know for a fact, because, I can say this, he has shared certain things that I know were more leaning to his side politically. And he was being called all these names for spreading all these fake news. I hit him up on the DMs and say, hey, man, here's the reason why that's wrong. This is why this might offend people. I give him the source, the information, and he's like, oh shit, you're right. I'm going to delete that. You're right. I shouldn't have mentioned that. And there you go. You have 1,000 SJWs yelling, like jumping down the guy's fucking throat. That's right. Not, people just become more entrenched in their beliefs. They go into the defensive, right? If I can reach out to him and say, hey man, this is why people are offended. This is why this is not true. Really, I think I'm appealing to people's innate sense of, I don't want to be made, like, I don't want to look like an idiot. So if you can explain to me that what I said is wrong, I shouldn't say that, is factually incorrect, most people, if you explain to them, accurately and in a way that really reaches to them, they won't want to perpetuate bullshit because they don't want to be seen as a bullshit peddler, I think.
Right. But the approach that you use is based on respect.
Yes, right? Absolutely.
That's what it is. And that's the key to this. Once you use respect, it's very difficult for a brain to get angry with you. When's the last time you got
Absolutely.
angry at someone treating you with respect?
It can
Right?
happen, even if they disagree with
Exactly
everything
right.
you say.
That's exactly right. And that is the way that we can help each other. Respect leads to value. Value leads to trust. With trust, you can share those secrets because you're not afraid you're going to be judged. That's part of what we need to do. So how do we address these enormous global issues one person at a time, just like that, by communicating with someone? And that's why, it's so wonderful to hear what you're doing, Izzy, because you're reaching a lot of people. But every now and then you get to reach one person individually with respect and hopefully help reframe for them what they just did. And they may not have meant to. They may not have meant to.
Stretch the cat.